If you feel lost, unsure who you are becoming, or uncomfortable with versions of yourself that once felt natural, do not skip this. This is not confusion. It is transition. Identity does not collapse loudly. It fades quietly until you notice. Stay. What you are feeling is not emptiness. It is the space where your old self no longer fits, and something truer is forming.
An identity ends before it disappears. First, it stops feeling natural. Roles that once defined you begin to feel heavy. You still perform them, but without presence. This discomfort is not insecurity. It is misalignment. Growth does not always add layers. Sometimes it removes them. When an identity completes its purpose, continuing to wear it creates tension instead of stability. Losing identification feels like losing direction. You may ask, if I am not this anymore, then who am I? This question creates fear because the mind prefers known discomfort over undefined truth. But identity is not meant to be permanent. It evolves with awareness. Confusion here is not collapse, it is transition between internal structures. Ego resists identity change because it relies on familiarity for safety. When old labels dissolve, the ego feels exposed. This creates insecurity, comparison, and self-doubt. But this reaction does not mean you are regressing. It means perception is expanding. The discomfort you feel is the friction between who you were and who you can no longer pretend to be. Many people try to rebuild identity quickly to escape uncertainty. They adopt new roles, beliefs, or goals prematurely. This delays real alignment. Identity cannot be forced into replacement. It needs space. When you allow the old structure to fully dissolve, the next one forms organically. Rushing this process recreates instability under a new name. The feeling of not recognizing yourself is not loss, it is honesty. You are no longer performing coherence where it no longer exists. This phase removes false certainty, so real alignment can emerge. Identity will return, lighter, quieter, more accurate. But only after you stop clinging to what no longer reflects your internal truth. When identity loosens, external validation loses power. Compliments feel empty. Criticism feels louder. This imbalance is temporary. It happens because internal reference points are reorganizing. You are no longer measuring yourself by old standards, but new ones are not fully formed yet. This gap creates insecurity, but it also creates honesty. You stop performing for approval and start listening inward. Insecurity during identity shifts is not weakness. It is exposure. Without familiar labels, the mind searches for ground. This is why comparison intensifies. You look outward to stabilize internally. But identity rebuilt through comparison is fragile. True reconstruction comes from tolerating uncertainty long enough for alignment to form naturally, without copying paths that no longer resonate. Loss of reference can feel disorienting. Habits, goals, and routines lose meaning. This does not mean you lack direction. It means direction is being recalibrated. When identity changes, motivation pauses. The pause prevents you from investing energy into structures that would soon collapse again. Stillness here is protective, not passive. Trying to explain your transition to others often increases confusion. Words lag behind internal change. This is why silence becomes attractive, not secrecy, simplicity. You do not owe clarity while clarity is still forming. Identity stabilizes faster when it is not constantly translated or defended. Internal coherence forms best without audience pressure. Reconstruction begins subtly. You notice preferences instead of plans, boundaries instead of declarations. What feels lighter guides you more accurately than logic here. Identity reforms through resonance, not reasoning. When you trust these quiet signals, Stability returns without force. You become grounded not by defining yourself but by allowing alignment to shape you naturally. As identity stabilizes internally, decision-making changes. You hesitate less, not because you know everything, but because you know what no longer fits. This clarity feels calm, not exciting. Choices stop being dramatic and become practical. You move away from what drains you without resentment. This is maturity forming. Identity becomes functional, not performative, rooted in coherence instead of image. Autonomy grows when you stop asking who you should be. The need for permission fades. You no longer wait for external confirmation to validate inner shifts. This independence is quiet. It does not seek recognition. It simply moves. Identity strengthens when you trust your internal signals more than collective expectations. From this place, alignment becomes self-sustaining. Fear of being misunderstood often delays identity integration. You worry about how change will be perceived, but understanding is not required for alignment. When identity evolves, explanations become optional. You are allowed to change without consensus. Stability increases when you stop managing others' interpretations and focus on internal coherence instead. Security during identity shifts does not come from certainty, it comes from self-permission. Allowing yourself to be undefined removes pressure. You stop rushing conclusions about who you are becoming. This patience protects the transition. When you no longer force definition, identity settles naturally, shaped by lived alignment rather than conceptual labels. Eventually, the sense of loss fades. You realize nothing essential was taken. What ended was outdated structure. What remains feels accurate, lighter, and more honest. Identity does not need to be loud to be real. It only needs to feel aligned. From this point, movement resumes without resistance, guided by quiet certainty instead of effort. Integration feels like calm consistency. You stop oscillating between old and new behaviors. Reactions soften. Choices feel natural instead of forced. This stability is not excitement, it is grounding. When identity integrates, energy stops scattering. You no longer rehearse who you are. You simply act from coherence. This phase confirms that the transition was real and that alignment is now embodied. Boundaries become intuitive during integration. You notice when to step back without guilt. You disengage without explanation. This is not withdrawal, it is self-respect. Clear identity protects energy effortlessly. You no longer negotiate with situations that feel wrong. Limits form before exhaustion appears, preserving clarity and preventing old patterns from reattaching to the new structure. Emotional stability returns quietly. Triggers lose intensity. Situations that once confused you now feel obvious. This does not mean life becomes perfect. It means your response changes. Identity alignment reduces internal conflict, freeing attention for what actually matters. When inner noise fades, perception sharpens and decisions require less mental effort. With integration, comparison loses relevance. You stop measuring progress against others because your direction feels personal and accurate. This independence is grounding. You trust your pace. Identity no longer seeks mirrors. It stands on internal reference. From here, growth becomes sustainable because it is guided by alignment, not urgency or external pressure. At this stage, identity serves instead of defines you. You move through life without constant self-analysis. Presence replaces monitoring. This freedom allows energy to flow toward creation rather than correction. When identity aligns, effort decreases and consistency increases. You are no longer becoming yourself. You are living from yourself. When identity aligns, life feels simpler without becoming smaller. You invest energy with intention. You choose fewer things but with more presence. This selectivity is not limitation, it is clarity. You stop scattering attention across roles that no longer represent you. From this point, direction feels quiet yet firm, guided by internal coherence rather than external demand. You may notice that some connections no longer fit. Conversations feel shallow. Expectations feel outdated. This is not rejection. It is resonance shifting. Identity alignment changes what you naturally attract and tolerate. You do not need to cut ties aggressively. Distance forms organically when coherence replaces obligation. What remains supports who you are now. Confidence during this phase is subtle. It does not announce itself, it shows through consistency. You stop doubting every decision. You trust your internal signals even when outcomes are uncertain. This trust stabilizes movement. Identity no longer seeks reassurance. It moves quietly, anchored in lived experience rather than imagined futures. Looking back, you realize the discomfort was necessary. Without losing reference, you would not have refined direction. Without insecurity, you would not have questioned outdated structures. Identity evolves through honest friction. What felt like loss was recalibration. What felt like confusion was reorientation. Nothing essential was broken. It was reorganized. When an old identity releases fully, energy returns naturally. Motivation reappears without pressure. Direction stabilizes without urgency. You do not rush to define yourself again. You allow experience to shape clarity. From this place, choices feel aligned and sustainable. The transition completes quietly, leaving you grounded, precise, and internally secure. If this message resonated, your identity is already shifting. Do not force definition. Stay present. Subscribe to this channel for guidance through transitions, inner restructuring, and alignment. You do not need to know exactly who you are becoming to move correctly. Clarity grows when resistance ends. Stay here. The journey continues step by step.